Welcome to the Dr. Mudgil podcast. This episode is going to be a little bit different than my prior episodes. I had a guest lined up and we were going to do the recording last Tuesday, but unfortunately he flaked on me and I was sort of scrambling a little bit, and I had actually recorded an entire separate podcast, sort of like just me talking. And I was working out with, you guys all know, Justin, Mr. J Fit, the Machine. You know, he's got a lot of aliases. We were working out yesterday, and I was telling him the quandary that I was in, and he had a really, really great idea. He said, "I'm coming up on a year of my podcast. You know, this is going to be, I believe, episode 18. Is that right, Ayush? Episode 18? 19. Episode 19. It's going to be episode 19." And he said, "I think it's time for you to be in the guest seat," which is where I'm sitting now. I usually sit on that side. And, maybe for you to answer some questions, because maybe people want to get to know me better. And I thought that was a great idea. So that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to turn it over to my man, who's the host of the podcast, Justin Jefferson, at Mr. J Fit. You can find him on Instagram, all over social media. He's a fitness powerhouse, a true beast. If you listen to his podcast that we recorded, I think my 5th or 6th podcast was a very special one. And, you can learn all about Justin, but he's the host now, so I'm turning the mic over to him.
Well, once again, it's a pleasure to be back here. So thank you for allowing me to do the honor of interviewing you on this very, very special occasion. And first and foremost, congratulations on coming up on a year.
I appreciate that, man.
I don't think people realize how much work these things really are and what goes into an entire podcast and getting it shot and edited and organizing. And especially in your case, you have different guests on. So I'm sure it's a ton of work. So congratulations, man.
Thanks, my man.
I've been enjoying them along the way. I've been listening to them. I'll check them out when I'm doing some cardio, when I'm driving in the car, because I'm really a podcast person. So definitely love to consume the Dr. Mudgil podcast on a regular basis, man. So I'm
that
excited.
Means a lot.
No, man, it means a lot for me to be here, man. But without further ado, I do want to keep a common theme that you do have going in your podcast. You do ask everyone what their definition of success is. So let's start there. What is your definition of success?
Well, I think that's a great question, Justin. It's just something that I do ask all my guests. And, I've said it a bunch of times in all of my podcasts, sort of inflected on this when my guests are giving me their definition. And, this is something that's kind of evolved for me over the course of years. When I was a kid, I thought success meant, having the Benzos and, the Porsches and the Rolexes and all the bling and all that stuff. And I think that's something that's pretty common to most kids. That's what you really equate success with, material stuff, like having a big house and fancy cars and those sorts of things. But and I didn't come from a lot growing up, as you know, and having gotten to a point in my life where that actually became somewhat of a reality, through my practices and, working really hard and, working my ass off. I realized that is not what success is all about. Those material possessions they give you very temporary pleasure. I'm talking very temporary. It's fleeting, a week, 2 weeks maybe. And then you start to become a slave to those things. And, if that's what success is, then it's a shitty place to be because, truthfully, going through that period of my life, it really made me become very introspective because I was like, I thought this is what success was all about, being able to play golf a few times a week and having a nice house and nice cars. And what I realized during that period, and I did a lot of introspection during that time of my life because it was a few months, thankfully it was very short-lived, but it was a really empty time in my life. And I realized, like looking back at what really made me happy over the course of, at that point, the 3.5 decades that I was on the planet, was embracing the hustle and grind. And that pertains to anything. So when I was in med school, and, we'll talk about this later on in the podcast, I'm sure, but there was like an aha moment, like a light bulb went off. And that's the first time in my life I actually really started to apply myself. And that was at the age of 23, I think I was. I kind of coasted up until that age. And I was able to get by coasting. But that was the first time I really hustled and grinded, and I got so much pleasure out of that. And, I got so much personal fulfillment out of that, like really busting my ass in med school. And then, that sort of has happened like multiple times in my life. building my practice. I started with nothing, and I had no patience. I was over $1 million in debt, and I worked my
Wow.
ass off to get myself out of that. And coming out on the other side through that hustling grind was very self-empowering. As you know, and you've been a big part of this, I had an incredible fitness transformation over the course of now it's
Yeah.
8 years that I'm going into. And that was very empowering, So principally through those three experiences in my life, I came to understand, for me personally, the definition of success is embracing the hustle and grind for whatever your goal is.
The hustle and the grind. And, that's one thing I respect about you is because for a lot of people, hustle and grind sounds cool to say, sounds cool to type in a post, but I've watched you live it. I've known you for, has it been 7 years? Somewhere around there,
2011,
right?
2011, I think.
2012.
2012.
Yeah. I've known you since 2012. And I've watched you live it.
Yeah.
My first interaction with you obviously was in the gym when I was working at Equinox, and just seeing you work, your work ethic there, and as I got to know you more over the years, seeing you grind it out through your business and build things up, and it's really been incredible to see. And I'm not surprised though that you've been successful in life, because it seems sometimes a lot of times it tends to translate over into everything else, everything that you do. They say how you do anything is how you do everything. Right. And I've never seen you do anything halfway. And I know you said you coasted until about 23. So I'm actually definitely interested in hearing a little bit more about that. Like, what was your let's take it way back for a bit to your childhood. What was that like? Like, I know you grew up in Brooklyn.
Yeah, so we started out in Brooklyn. My mom was a physician. She was a resident when I was really little. She had trained in India, then had to go through all her training again here. And my very first podcast with my mom, she had a very, very tough life.
Yes, I heard.
And I get emotional sometimes when I talk about it. But she hustled and grinded, man, for us, for my brother and I. She was a single parent, raised 2 boys. And I grew up in Brooklyn. There were 9 of us living in a 3-bedroom apartment.
Wow.
And those are my fondest memories, man. Because we didn't have money. Those roaches all over the apartment. You turn on the light and the roaches would just
Scatter.
It was crazy. Looking back at it and, the way that I live now, like, it's hard to wrap my head around it, but we didn't think about that at the time. I was living with my cousins, my brother, it was so fun. My mom would go to work really early in the morning. My grandma would make me breakfast, and, it was just a really sweet time. And my brother, who's 7 years older than me, when he was about to start high school, we were in Start City, which isn't the greatest part of Brooklyn. It's very close to East New York. Okay. It's the project. It's basically like the projects. It's like a nicer version of the projects, but it's the projects. And the schooling there wasn't great. So when my brother was about to start high school, my mom was, she's like, we have to move to like a better area with the better schools. So we moved to the South Shore of Long Island to a town called Rockville Center, but I went to Oceanside School. So my brother was starting high school, and I was going into first grade at the time. So we moved out here to Long Island, and it was 1981. I had just turned 6. And interestingly enough, at that time in Long Island, like where I grew up, it wasn't diverse at all. So I think I was one of 2 or maybe 3 Indian kids in my entire elementary school. There was like a shit ton of racism.
Sorry to hear that.
No, it is what it is. That's just what the times were like. People just were, the world was a smaller place back then, right? So Definitely. There wasn't Instagram, there wasn't Facebook, and it's just the way it was, that's just, and I don't have any resentment towards it. People just weren't knowledgeable especially kids,
Yeah, exactly.
to like embrace other cultures. And I was like a weird kid, like I was like this brown kid in a white school.
You were different, and they weren't.
Yeah, I mean, to the outside
them.
world, I was weird. I was like,
Right.
like I didn't belong, and that was always a very, looking back now, like I was living through it, so I didn't really think about it that much. But I think a lot of that really defined, who I was in a weird way, because I never wanted to be who I was growing up, because I was always the odd man out, especially in those younger years. I always felt like, why can't I be like everybody else? Like, why can't we celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah or,
Right.
We had these traditions that no one was doing that shit when I was growing up, like the holidays now, like, in our school district, we get Diwali off, which is like the big Indian holiday.
Right.
No one even knew who that shit was when I was growing up, you know? But it's almost like a sense of guilt feeling that way, like, you know, having felt that way. But now, like, I really embrace my culture, you know? And I think having gone through that where you're kind of like hiding from it, and, you know, just because it's almost like a matter of survival, you know, like trying to assimilate.
Right.
But, you know, now the pendulum swings back the other way because, you know, the world is a different place and I always feel a lot more comfortable in my skin. But, you know, I had a lot of great memories growing up too, a lot of great friends. It was just like a regular blue collar neighborhood, essentially. You know, we'd play wiffle ball on the block and manhunt and all the things that kids do. And, you know, I had a great childhood, man. You know, it was a good place to grow up, you know, and it really informed, in many ways who I am today, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And listen, you turned out to be an extraordinary human being who contributes to society every day.
I appreciate it.
I mean, you are a world-class dermatologist. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Pathologist, is that correct?
I see. I'm a dermatologist and a dermatopathologist. Right. I do two things. Yeah, so I'm board certified in both of those things. In my practices, that's what I do in my practices.
See, didn't want to get that wrong.
No, you got it, man.
All right, perfect. So as we fast forward a little bit, excuse me, take us through maybe your high school,
Sure.
Your last maybe 1 or 2 years of high school before college. Did you already know you wanted to pursue medicine, or were you kind of still undecided at this point?
So since I was a little kid, since I was 4 or 5 years old, like my mom literally beat it into my brother and my head that, you know, we have to be doctors. Like it was you know, for her, being a single parent and being able to raise 2 boys on her own, being a doctor was like, in her mind, like the reason why she was able to do it. Like she had a steady job. She worked for the government. She worked for the VA hospital. So she wasn't like, you know, like the doctors that you think, like the, you know, driving around the Benzes and all that shit. It was like, you know, you know, she was making a very, very, very modest income, but it was a steady, stable job. She was able to work from 9 to 5 essentially, and then be home for us at night.
Right.
You know, there was no call. So for her, it was an ideal situation where she could work as a professional, make a modest living, but also be able to raise her 2 boys. So with that mindset, she always knew that if we became doctors, and this is what she always says, I want you to be able to stand on your own 2 feet, you know? So she knew if we became doctors, we'd be able to do that. So it was literally beat into us. Like my brother, I remember when he was in college, he wanted to go to law school. And my mom said, that's no problem. You can go to law school, but you have to go to medical school first. You know, so that was like, there was no choice. So even when I went to college, like, you know, there was like, you know, you're going to med school basically, you know? So I never really even considered doing, I mean, if you ask any of my friends, like what I said I wanted to be growing up when I was a kid, it's like the doctor, you know, I mean, that's what I have to do.
Wow. So since you were young,
pounded into me, man. Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm glad, you know, like I can't imagine doing anything else. So, you know, my mom, you know, I don't know if it was because I was brainwashed to wanting to do it, but I do love what I do. And, you know, for me, it's the perfect job, you know, so it all worked out.
Just a random question. Did your brother actually finish med school and then go to law school?
Yeah, he actually went through med school. He's an ophthalmologist. So
oh, you see that? So he just ended up sticking with it.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, if I could be bold enough to speak for him, I don't think he has any regrets either with his career trajectory.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so going back to like what high school was like. So I was actually a pretty bad student. I never really cared much about school. I was kind of like an outsider. So I used to get into a lot of fights. I got suspended a bunch of times.
Wow, really?
So this is like during like my middle school years. You know, I was always like good at taking tests. So I could take tests very well, like standardized tests, but I did not apply myself at all in school. And my mom was so busy, you know, with work and with my older brother, who at the time was like kind of applying for colleges and, you know, dealing with stuff that was a lot more pressing than me being in like, you know, elementary school. I really slipped through the cracks.
Just kind of got pushed along.
Just coasted by. I was like, you know, I remember one time my report card, I got like 2 or 3 D's and like a couple of C's. This was when I was in 7th grade, and I was like shitting in my pants, like, how am I going to bring this report card home to my mom? And my mom still doesn't know this to this day, but now she'll find out if she listens to this. I remember going to the public library and just making a fake report card on the computer and giving it to my mom, and she totally fell for it.
Now, did you make it look like the actual?
Yeah, as much as I could. You know, like the like word processing wasn't as sophisticated back then.
Right.
But as much as I could, like it was enough that she never.
Wow.
I mean, now she knows. But
Wow.
I mean, I was really a really, really bad student.
That's
But my
interesting.
mom knew, like, she knew that you had to take AP classes and you had to like get into that track in order, like,
Right.
you know, in her mind to go to a good college, and you know, to her that was very important. So, when I was in ninth grade, I was in like just the standard track. So there was like an honors track, and like there was the honors track, a regular track, and I forget exactly what it was, but I was in like the regular to like just the regular track. So you never go from the regular track to the AP track. It's just, you know, you can't make that jump.
Right.
But remember, my mom talked to the AP class you could take in 10th grade was AP European history. And my mom talked to the teacher, said, "Listen, I need my son to go to AP European history next year, because in her mind, that's like, you know, you got to get on that track."
Yeah.
And the
Advanced
teacher's like,
placement.
you know, there's no way, like, you know, he can't handle it, like, you know, he's not a strong enough student, you know, he'll just get destroyed. And my mom's like, "No, like, he's going into that class," and you know, so she forced me into that class. So that's 10th grade, and it's crazy, man. Like, that was like this sort of like a mini turning point for me, because those guys that I was in class with in that 10th grade class are still my best friends to this day.
Wow. That's
And we all
awesome.
kind of grew up near each other. And I realized that, like, wow, they were like really smart guys, but they're also like cool, you know, like it was kind of like cool to be smart,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Definitely.
So that's like when I kind of started applying myself a little bit more
And you got pushed
intensely.
into that AP.
But it wasn't even like that big a deal. Like, I would basically just do the minimum amount required to like get an A, you know? So,
Oh, the minimum required for an A.
but honestly, like, that was like my frame of mind, you know?
Right.
So I did well, you know, I did well in that class. I was probably, you know, me and my buddies, like, it was very competitive back then. It was like back in the day, like when they used to like literally put everyone's grade on the on the board.
What they used to like hang it up? So
Yeah,
everybody
they
just,
literally would be like, okay, these are the top 5 grades. You know, there was nothing
oh
PC back then.
wow.
It's like totally different than it was now. And our goal was always, we had a study group, it was me and 2 of my buddies, and our goal was always to like have the highest average. And like we pretty much always did. Like, you know, we were just competitive. It was like a
Right.
sport for us, you know.
Right.
But I realized then that, wow, okay, it's cool. Like, I could be smart, and I could, you know, still have fun, like hang out with my friends and stuff like that. So that was like the first turning point. But I remember, just because I had such a bad track record in high school, that even for me to get into, so I remember like in my senior year, like BC calculus was like the big class to take, you know, like 8 kids took it. And like, you know, the
Wow.
teacher didn't want me to go into it because he didn't think I was ready, but I was always good at math. So I was like, I put my foot down. I was like, I'm going into that class. And that for me, and I crushed it, you know, but I remember this vividly, and this still fucking drives me crazy. Everyone used to copy off of me. Like, my boys used to copy their homework off of me, you know, calculus. But the teacher thought I was a clown because he had me in ninth grade when I wasn't a good student. So he accused me of copying off of them.
Wow. Okay.
You know, he literally pulled me aside. It's like, dude, you're the wrong answers, the right answers, they're all the same. Like, you know, you can't copy off of these guys. I was like, no, they're copying off of me. He's like, no. And I was like, all right. I was like, listen, wait to see what happens when we take the AP test. And I remember I just crushed the AP test, and both of those guys totally bombed it. And I remember going to school in the summer because I knew he was there. And I was like, I told you, man. Like, you know. So it was little things like that started, you know, I had like this little motivation in
Right.
me, but I never really applied myself much. So again, I would do like the minimal amount, you know, which was enough. You know, it was enough to get by and to get through. But it was well, we'll get into it, but you know, it wasn't until like much later on, after college, that like one of my friends, who was a friend of mine from college, and maybe I should backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna keep talking, man, because I want to roll here. So when
Go with it.
when I went to college, I went to Emory for college. I remember my first semester. Again, barely did anything. Just would study for the test the night before, take the test, boom. My first semester, I had a 3.76, and I was pretty proud of myself. You know, I think I had like 3 A's and like a B plus or something like that. It was something like that. And I got my grades. Told my mom, I was like, you know, like, I got these great grades, and I remember she looked at my report card. And she's like, you know, this is terrible. You know, she's like, I'm not going to pay whatever it was then for you to go to this private school and get these kind of grades. She's like, if you don't get a 3.9 or above, then you're coming back and going to state school. She's like, I'm not. And she was legit serious. Like, she was like those are some bullshit grades, and you have to do better, or else it's not worth my money. So I literally didn't get anything less than an A for the rest of college. So like, for me, my mindset was, okay, I got to do the minimum amount to get an A. So I think I graduated like a 3.99 or 3.9, whatever. It was some very high GPA because I never got anything but an A after that.
So you could just turn it on, like.
Yeah, but it wasn't that hard, you know. Like it wasn't that, you know. I could figure it out. Like I could figure out how to take a test, how to study for a test, how to like, you know, work the system a little bit, you know. I remember one time when I was a sophomore, I got like I was a math major at the time. Me and one of my buddies were math majors, and I got a D on the first test, and I was like, "Fuck!" I was like, if I get like a C in this class, I'm never gonna get into medical school. Like I was literally shitting in my pants, and
Was the test that hard? Did you not study?
you know, it was above my head. Like the people that were there, the people in that class were just much more like math minded than I was. You know.
Yeah, I hate math.
You know, so I was always very good at math, you know, but it was like very abstract stuff. And, you know, I realized then that I just need to get out of this class and drop being a math major and like do something that's, you know, more suited for my mind. So I remember talking to the teacher. He was he was kind of like this jockey, big guy from the South, you know. And I was like, listen, I'm in the wrong place. I shouldn't even be in this class. You know, I'm not equipped to be a math major, but I need to get out of this class without my GPA getting killed because I want to go to medical school, you know? So he's like, all right, so like, you know, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, if I get 100 on every test, like the next 2 tests and the final, then you have to give me an A for the class. Even though the average wouldn't have averaged out today because there's 3 tests and the final or something like that. So he's like, all right. He's like, deal. He actually agreed to this, and I literally got 100 on every test and got out with an A, and then I dropped the math major right away. I was done.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, but little things like that, those are like the reason why I'm telling you is not to like, you know, toot my horn, but there was like little glimpses of what I was capable of, you know, like, and even to this day, like sometimes you think back on those things, there, you know, these like little nuggets of success that you had, which I think really empowered me later on,
Right.
you know?
So what was the aha moment where you decided the bare minimum was no longer enough?
So when I went to med school, I went to Stony Brook for med school, and it was a class of 100. And like med school is a different game. Right. Like everyone there is.
You said a class of 100?
There's 100 kids in the class, and 95 of them are like very fucking smart, you know? So I remember when I got to Emory, my dream was always good to go to like an Ivy League school. And I remember when I applied to all of the Ivy League schools and like, you know, Duke, I wanted to go to Duke, or I want to go to like, you know, like a really good college, you know, but I got rejected from every single one of them, you know, because I wasn't a strong enough student. You know, my grades weren't good enough, you know, my standardized test scores were fine and I did well towards the end of high school. But in my mind, I was like, you know, Emory's a great college and I have nothing bad to say about it, but I almost like felt like I belong at one of these other schools, and I'm here. It was like my safety school, you know. And when I got to med school, like more than half of the class is from an Ivy League school. So there's like, you know, a bunch of kids from Harvard, a bunch of kids from Yale, a bunch of kids from Columbia, a bunch from Cornell, a bunch from Penn, a few from Princeton, some from Duke. You know, all these great schools that are represented. And I always had this chip on my shoulder, like, you know what, I didn't get to one of those schools, so like I'm just not as smart as these guys. You know, like they're much smarter than me. You know. And my first year of medical school, I was so the class is 100, and like the way it's graded, it's like honors, high pass, fail, or something. I think it's something like that. So I was right in the middle of the class. I honored a couple of classes, I high passed a couple of classes, I passed a couple of classes, but I was like right in the middle. So probably like, you know, if there was a ranking, I was between like 40 and 50 somewhere. You know, like solidly in the middle. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm hanging with the big dogs, you know, like all these really, really smart kids, you know. And my friend from college, his name is Sammy. He's an orthopedic surgeon now. Really, really smart kid, but really hardworking kid. So we were always the kids in college that had like the highest grades on like the tests, you know, like whatever, organic chemistry or whatever it was.
Okay, this is undergrad.
Like, this is undergrad. It was always Sammy and Hash, you know. And I was like a hippie kid. I had like long hair, you know. And Sammy was kind of more of like a straight dude. And Sammy like worked really hard, but was an amazing student. And I would always do well on tests, you know. So there was always like the two of us, you know. And Sammy came to visit me when I was in my first year of medical school, the summer between my first and second year. Sammy went to Emory Medical School. I went to Stony Brook. So he came to hang out for a week, and he asked me, he's like, hey, man, how's like med school going? And I was like, oh, it's going pretty good, man. You know, I'm like right in the middle of the class. You know, I honored a couple classes, high passed a couple classes. And dude, he looked me straight in the eye. I will never forget this. And this is literally the single most motivating moment of my life. He looked me dead in the eyes, totally serious, my friend. And he said, for once in your life, why don't you apply yourself? I was like, what? He's like, dude, just try. Just try. See what happens. And I'm telling you, man, that was a fucking life-changing moment.
That was the boost you needed.
So that next year, the school year started, and I literally read the material to learn it. I was like, let me read this, instead of like going through something like 10 times to just memorize it to take the test, I would read it one time slowly just to learn it. I still never went to a single class in medical school. I did all the shit that I usually do. Like I wasn't I didn't care about going to a classroom and listening to the teacher. All the classes were transcribed, so you'd get the transcript of the class. So like a week before the test, or 4 or 5 days before the test, I would sit and I would study. So I would just chill and then study. Like study crazy hard and chill very hard. So I remember just going through the transcripts very slowly to learn it, and like I had like such an understanding of the material. And then I remember that very first test that we took, it was microbiology. I think the average on the test was like a 60 something. Like, and they would curve it up. I got like a 95 raw score.
Wow.
And I was like, oh shit. I was like, this is some serious shit, And literally, I just kept doing that for the rest of it. So for everything really going forward at that point, I was like, oh man, I was like, it's totally different. It's kind of like, I mean, it sounds so stupid to say and it sounds very arrogant, but it's like, it must be like how like a Michael Jordan or a LeBron feels, because they put in so much work and they're so talented, and it's like a different game almost, And I'm not saying I'm that, but I'm saying I felt what it must feel like to be that, because I would study and it was just like a different level of understanding that I had. Like I would take a test, it was almost like a game, And it really kind of went through that, like just basically from there forward for like anything academic, it just was always, it was, not that it was easy. I'd work hard and I'd learn the material, but I never worried about the test. I was like, dude, I got this. Like I know.
Yeah, like you knew you had it under control.
Yeah, like listen, LeBron steps onto the court. He knows he's gonna fucking drop 50 points if he wants to. It was kind of like that sort of feeling.
And that was your aha. See, that was.
And I know it all to Sammy, man. Because I never had the confidence in myself to think I had that kind of talent.
Yeah, and so that carried you all through med school.
Dude, the rest. I mean, it was like when we were doing our surgical rotations. We watch those like TV shows.
Right.
And like they, like they pimp everyone like on rounds, like they say, what's this artery, and like they go through everyone, and you have to like say what it is. You couldn't
wait for them to call on you.
So no, dude, this is how it was. So in the beginning, they start with like the youngest person, so that would be the third-year medical student. Then they go to the fourth-year medical student, the intern, the resident, the second-year resident, the third-year resident, the chief resident. And if they don't know it, then the attending says the answer. There was this book. It was called Surgical Recall, where it has like all like the things that they pimp you on. Dude, no joke, I fucking memorized the entire book. Like I read it really slowly, I memorized it, So it came to the point like when we're on rounds, by like the second week, they would go through everybody. Everyone called me Hash, that was my nickname. They'd go through everybody, they'd be like, all right, Hash, what's the answer? I'd be like, boom. Like I just
wow,
I had such a command like of the material, and that's the way I've approached everything in my life from there forward. So like working out, nutrition. It's like you only know me as going balls to the wall with stuff.
That's all I know from you, yeah.
Right, but that's like the second half of my life that I've been balls to the wall. But I'm literally like that now with everything. It's like nothing is. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, man. Yeah. Because why not?
I've never seen you do anything halfway.
Right, but it's funny because people that know me for my entire life, it's like I mean I don't know what. I'm sure they've seen some kind of change in me, I guess. But yeah, I mean that's why I do that. It's all because of Sammy.
Well, shout out to Sammy.
Yeah, Sammy Khan, if you're listening, man, thank you.
So all right, so as we're going through residency, you have your aha moment, and through college, you have your aha moment. You go into med school. At what point did you decide on dermatology?
So I between my second and third year, there's a thing called the Howard Hughes Fellowship, which is it's kind of like the Rhodes Scholarship of med school, and I applied for one in my second year. And I got it. And I remember when I got it, actually, like, it's like a big deal. Like, this is like a big deal to get. I remember I told my mom, I was like, Mom, guess what? I got a Howard Hughes Fellowship. And she was like, I remember she like was talking to like her colleagues, like, do you think he should really take a year off? Like, I don't know if that's a good idea. He should get through med school. They're like, no, you don't understand. He's like, got to take a year off for this thing. So I took a year off and I actually did skin cancer research. And
nice.
that was actually another sort of cool like little win in my life. So when you do like the research, you all go down to the NIH after, or the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which is in Bethesda, Maryland, and you all present your research. And there was like I think 25 of us, or no, there's 40 of us from around the country. And again, I was the kid from Stony Brook, which is like a very small medical school, and everyone else there was from like Harvard Medical School, Stanford Medical School, all the big schools. And you present your research. You're basically competing for 5 scholarships that will pay for the entire rest of medical school and all your living expenses and all that stuff. And I went into that presentation, remember, so prepared. I bought one of those slide projectors to my hotel room, and I used to literally just project the slides on the wall of the hotel and like practice my presentation, just so it was like so like second nature, and I crushed it, man, and I won one of those 5 scholarships.
Wow.
But it was, I knew I was going to, like I knew like if I did it, if I put the work in, even though I was really intimidated again, just being around all those like super high caliber academic minds, just because, even to this day, if someone's like, oh, I went to like Harvard or Stanford or something like that, I'm like, oh shit, man, wow, that's dope. You must be like a genius, It's like those things you feel growing up, they still carry over later on in life, Like you have like, it's almost like instant cred with me, like, wow, that's amazing.
Because you know what it takes.
Yeah. Yeah, but also I didn't get in. You know what I mean? So that I didn't get into those schools. So, it's like I have a tremendous amount of respect for the people that did.
Do you feel like if you had that self-application
1,000%,
in high school, you've gotten? Yeah, I would assume. I would think so too.
No doubt, but I didn't,
So, all right, listen, you got it. Thanks to
no regrets. Regrets. I tell my wife this all the time because I have kids now who are going to start going through all that stuff. And, the truth is, you end up where you're supposed to be. If I did miraculously get into one of those colleges, I probably would have been eaten up alive because I wasn't ready for it. I needed to kind of go through things the way I went through them and then have Sammy talk to me in medical school. Like, everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, because you wouldn't have met Sammy, probably.
Yeah, and I never would have, just everything happens for a reason. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I have zero regrets with the way things turned out. And that's what I convey to my wife about our kids. Is like, listen, there's no reason to put so much crazy amount of pressure on them. I mean, they should do well academically, but if they end up, whatever they end up for college, that's where they're supposed to go, and then they'll figure it out.
That's it. So you get through, you figure out dermatology is the way. You finish med school. I guess you have to go through rotations at the end.
So you do med school, then you do an internship, and you do a residency. So I did my dermatology residency at Mount Sinai in New York City, where I'm still on staff, and I made some of the best friends I have in life there. And then I did a fellowship in dermatopathology, which is the second thing I'm boarded in at the place called Ackerman Academy of Dermatopathology in New York City. Bernie Ackerman was like this guy who was like the god of dermatopathology. And again, another one of like a mentor that I had that really kind of steered me in the right direction. I was at the point where I was doing my residency, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to go and practice. I'm just going to practice dermatology. And one of my attendings, who actually played a really big role with me going to Mount Sinai, his name's Dr. David Kriegel, who's just an amazing mentor in my life. He said to me, he's like, you should think about applying for a fellowship, because he was a surgeon. He was a skin cancer surgeon. And he said, because when patients come to see me, they like that I'm a dermatologist, but they're like, but he's also a skin cancer surgeon. He's like, for you, if you do dermatopathology, it's like, okay, he's a dermatologist, but he's also a dermatopathologist. It's like, I was like, that really kind of stuck with me. But I wanted to stay in the city. I was married, and my wife and I were living in Manhattan, so I didn't want to leave, and she was working in the city. So I applied to this is the place, like the Ackerman Academy. So I applied to one place, and I was fortunate enough to get into it. And so I did another year of training there. And then my first year out of fellowship, I was working, kind of doing 2 things. I was working in a lab up in Westchester, and I was seeing patients in the city at one of my other attendings practices part-time. And I thought I was going to do that for a few years, but after doing it for maybe like 10 months, I realized that I just needed to do my own thing. Not that anything bad, both places were great, but I always had like a little bit of an entrepreneurial mindset, and I always imagined having my own office. And my wife really encouraged me a lot, and she's like, you should do it. And this was in 2008. This was spring of 2008, right before the market crashed. And I went to the bank, and I literally, no joke, dude, I borrowed $1 million from the bank. I didn't have any money, but they would lend money to doctors back then. It was easier to borrow money.
Different time, yeah. Wow.
So I had my daughter was a year old, a little less than a year old, and she's like 10 months old. And I borrowed $1 million. I don't come from money. I didn't have any money behind me, and I a real estate, piece of real estate on Fifth Avenue in Lower Manhattan. It was a dump. I had to totally gut renovate it. And I started practice, man. I just opened up, I hung up my shingle. And it was rough, man, in the beginning. I used to live in that office, man, 7 days a week. I used to, I had no patience. I just used to wait for patience. Like someone would call me, like, "Yep, come on in."
I was gonna ask, like, when you do you remember your first day open in the practice?
Man. March 23rd, 2009.
What was that like? Like, how did you
It was
feel?
exciting.
Were you freaking out?
It was exciting. So the construction really went over like it always does. We went over budget, over time, all that stuff. But March 23rd, 2009, I remember my very first patient. I can't say his name because of HIPAA, but I remember he wrote a nice review online also. And it was funny because the review was like, it was really efficient. I didn't have to wait. And in my head, I was thinking, yeah, no shit, you don't have to wait because there's no one else here except for you. But yeah, I remember it was very dusty the week before. So we had to like dust everything off. They had just finished the construction. And I hired two girls, one for the front desk and one to help me in the back. And we got the whole office ready, the three of us. And then we opened up at 7 o'clock in the morning, March 23rd, 2009.
Wow.
And I think I had 3 patients that entire week.
3.
Yeah. I was kind of hedging a bit because I'm a pathologist. I was reading slides for a very large group in Long Island. So I was their pathologist. So I was able to make some income doing that, but it was literally coming in one pocket, going out the other to pay for my practice.
Can you explain for the audience exactly what a pathologist is?
So if you go to a dermatologist or really any doctor, but I'll use dermatologist as an example, and they take a skin biopsy, that piece of skin goes off to a lab somewhere where someone tells you what it is by looking at that skin under a microscope. So it gets processed in like a very, very sophisticated way and placed on a slide, on a glass slide, like you remember from when you were in high school or college. Mm-hmm. And then I look at that glass slide and I say, okay, this is basal cell carcinoma or whatever it is. I render a report and I give it to the doctor. So I was doing that for a group in Long Island. So some of the bigger groups will bring a pathologist in-house to be their doctor. Right. So I was their doctor, their pathologist in-house. So I used to manage their lab and read slides for them. And at the same time, I was seeing my own patients in my New York City office. So I was kind of like doing 2 jobs.
So it kind of helped balance things out a little bit.
Totally. I mean, yeah, it covered a lot of my expenses. So I was basically able to hedge my practice with the income I was generating. It was basically having like 2 full-time jobs. Because the person I took over, it was her full-time job. So I was doing that and building my practice. And, I did that for years. I actually did that up until just a few years ago. So I kind of had like 3 full-time jobs for a really long time. Because since then I've opened up my own lab where I read slides for other doctors. And I have like 2 clinical practices where I see patients. So yeah, but it's great. I'm fortunate that I did it. And I have Dr. David Kriegel to thank for pushing me into pathology because it really helped me build up my practices.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Do you remember? I know you said you opened up in 2009, mm-hmm. and obviously, I'm sure it's like starting any business. It's tough in the beginning, and it could be very stressful, and you're kind of like,
yeah,
oh boy, I know what that's like too. And my question is for you: was there a moment where you kind of felt like you could finally exhale, like, okay, this is?
Yeah, I remember like 6 months into having my practice, I was able to cover my expenses. I mean, I didn't take a salary for the first like 3 years probably.
Right.
But I remember that at that time I was able to like cover my payroll, cover my mortgage payment, cover my maintenance. Yeah, it happened pretty quick.
Pretty fast, yeah.
It took me, and that was cool, man. Like that was like, wow. I was like, like what I built here, like it's working. I remember one time my wife came to visit me at the office, and I had 2 employees at the time, but I had this office I was running. And like she said to me, she's like, wow, she's like, you really have like a little operation going on over here, And I was like, that felt really good, because it was like, I was making some, not making money, but I was able to cover my expenses. Right. I wasn't losing money.
Right.
And then it slowly just kind of, you know what that's like when you start your own business. So that was cool, man. And, that really, and it didn't take me as long as I thought it was going to take me.
That's awesome. And obviously that had become more and more successful over time, and you built your reputation. At what point did you decide it was time for location 2?
Yeah, so when my third was born, we moved out. It was just too small to live in the city. So we always planned on having we had 2 kids and a dog. And I was actually in contract to buy a bigger apartment in the city, and my practice was in the city. We were going to stay there. But God gave us a 3rd child unexpectedly. And my wife was 3 months pregnant when we had signed the contract. So I looked at my wife and I was like, we got to get out of here. So I literally, I don't know if this is quite the way it went down, but she literally said that I just started looking at House of Long Island. I just picked a house and I bought it. I know we both played a role there. But yes, we ended up moving out here in August of 2012 because the house I closed on, I had to do a bunch of work to. And after being here for a few years, my wife actually wanted to start a practice of her own as well.
Sure, 'cause she's a
And
dentist.
she was encouraging me to like, maybe you should maybe open up a practice out here. And I did need space because I needed space for a laboratory where I could process my specimens. So we ended up getting the space that we're sitting in right now. I think we got it in 2014. I opened up shop here in November of 2015. But that's around the time when I was talking about like there was this period in my life where I was kind of just like coasting. So I opened this office, and this was like a big undertaking. It's a huge space, and I did a massive renovation. And I was back at square one because any money I was generating from my office in New York City was used to build out this space here. And I had no patients here when I started, so I had to start from scratch. I remember my first couple of weeks here, I had like 1 or 2 patients, and it was very demoralizing because I was so busy in my Manhattan office, but it was dead here.
Right.
It was like this weird like reality that I was living in where I was like, I'm starting from scratch in one place, but I'm so established in another place, which was interesting. But around all that time, I stopped the group I was reading slides for that I was mentioning in Long Island. They were bought by a private equity firm, and the deal that the private equity firm was offering me to stay on board and read slides just honestly just wasn't worth my time, like what was involved.
Yeah.
So I made a decision to just stop and just kind of focus my energies into my own practice. And I think it was all kind of around the same time. So there was one particular summer where I kind of stopped reading slides for that group. My practice in the city was doing very well, and I had 2 doctors and a PA that were working for me there. I was only going to the city like 1 day a week. I was focusing on building out this office here, but I was literally like playing golf. It was a summer, so I was playing golf like 4 or 5 times a week.
Nice.
I was I was like living the good life, quote unquote. Like I'd arrived, right? But I remember, and I mentioned this earlier, that it was an empty time, man. It was like I wasn't hustling, like I was just kind of like coasting, and I was building out this office. So I was coming here and like, working here a bit. I would go to the city, like I said, 1 day a week, and I was always very busy. I'd see like 40 or 50 patients in like a session when I went to the city to see patients. But things just started like falling apart around me a little bit. Nothing major, but I was having some issues with staff and, like managing my staff in the city office because I wasn't really there that much. And some of my personnel, like some of the higher level employees that were working for me, started having like a bit of friction there. Nothing terrible, but it was a weird time, and it really made me like look within a lot and figure out like, like what the fuck is going on, like, and I realized a lot of the problems I was having is because I kind of took my eye off the ball. I kind of like let off the pedal a little bit, and maybe it was a time that a friend of mine told me this is like, maybe you needed that time to kind of reset, recharge, and maybe that's what it was. But it made me like kind of think about, okay, what do I want to do now? I'm at this plateau right now, and like what's next, and looking at this part of that period of my life retrospectively, I read this book by David Meltzer called Connected to Goodness, which a friend of mine recommended to me. And he basically defines like the stages of success. And, one of the stages is a stage called the arriver stage, where you hustle really hard and then you arrive and, you have some money in your pocket, like, you're kind of like feeling successful. And there's basically 3 things that happen at the arriver stage. You can stay at the arriver stage and coast, which I probably could have done. You fall from the arriver stage because like you lose any hustle in you. And then, that's why so many people who are wealthy get bankrupt. Someone wins a lotto, they get back,
they get
because you've arrived and then you just blow it all. Or you elevate yourself from the arriver stage to the next stage, which I can't remember exactly what that's called in his book. But so I was in that arriver stage for a couple of months, and I realized that that's not for me, and I really, through like talking to friends and reading a bunch of books and all that sort of stuff, I really pushed myself into doing this, like what we're doing now. Like I realized for me, my goal is to touch as many lives as possible, and I've had all these amazing transformations in my life and these things that I've done as, if I can do it, and I'm a big believer in this, anybody can do it. Like if I could get fit,
Right.
I have the worst genetics for fitness. You know, I'm really like fighting my genetics.
Well,
And,
you're kicking their
well,
tail, man.
because I'm putting the work in,
Yeah,
right? So
I see it.
if I can do it, you know, and it's not easy, you know, but if I can do it, anyone can do it. And if like I could share that story and like I could touch one life, 5 lives, 10 lives, 100 lives, and maybe kind of get a light bulb to go off in someone else said, like Sammy did for me. That's the fucking win, man. That's what I want to do. So I realized then that I need to do more. And like seeing the patients in my practice, I can touch, you know, maybe 100 lives a week, right? But if you're more involved on like a larger platform, like, you know, I mean, I don't know how many people listen to this podcast, but hopefully it'll be a lot one day, or my YouTube channel or my Instagram, or, you know, if I put a lot of effort into those things and try to like get this message of positivity and self-empowerment out, if I have the potential to touch more lives, you know, and that's what it's all about. So,
That's it.
you know, I've been full court press on this stuff. You know, I haven't taken a salary in a year and a half because I'm putting all my resources back into this, you know, because it's something I really passionately believe in, you know, so I'm like, you know, like I'm balls to the wall with this, you know.
Completely pedal to the metal.
Yeah.
And like you're the true definition of an influencer, and I think that term gets thrown around a lot now on social media. Like, oh, I'm an influencer. You're an actual influencer. You're literally having a positive impact on people with the message you're spreading, with the content that you're sharing with them, because you're letting people. All you're doing is letting people into your life.
Totally,
with something that you've already been doing on a smaller scale, and now that you have tens of thousands of followers on Instagram and YouTube, and you have this podcast is growing on a weekly basis. You know, you really are truly impacting a lot of people, man. And I just want to I commend you on that. Like, you're doing an awesome job with that. And you can even go in your comment section and see on the stuff you post on Instagram, you know, people are saying, oh, you inspire me, you motivate me, man. Like, and you said that was one of your goals. You definitely accomplishing that. Now for you, obviously, you've thus far, we started off talking about success. You've accomplished a lot, you know, at still a very young age. Obviously, you've been on the New York Times Super Doctors list multiple times. You are featured in so many different publications. You were on CBS News in the Morning just a few days ago.
Yeah.
Instagram has verified your account, you know, which is a big deal. They consider you a public figure. So clearly you have, I mean, obviously I know you personally, but even from the outside looking in, you have some type of drive and work ethic. What do you turn to in a sense of the content you consume? What books are you reading, or what are you listening to? Like, what gets you going?
Yeah, I love that, man. So anyone who I admire, I always ask them like, what they're reading, you know. And I used to read a lot, you know. So one of my best friends in college, his name is Jordan. He was a big reader, and he would always give me books to read. He was an English major, so he'd always like, you know, read all kinds of cool stuff, you know, like Roots and, you know, any book that moved him, like, you know, Ralph Ellison stuff, anything that touched him, you know, he would tell me to read, and I would read it. And then as life got kind of in the way, like with med school and residency and kids, I stopped reading. Like, you know, I just didn't have time to read. So what kind of really set up this push now? In 20, I think it was like October 2017, I was sitting with one of my buddies who was like an entrepreneur. And I said to him, I was like, you know, these are my goals. I want to be able to touch more people, but I'm having these problems with my business. I need to get my business in check. And he's like, dude, read these 5 books. So he gave me 5 books. It was The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber, which teaches you how to kind of like systemize your business. Mm-hmm. There's a book called The One Thing. I can't remember who the author is, but it's just basically, there's like one thing you need to focus on at a time. Otherwise you can't multitask, really. That was a great lesson in there. 10X Rule by Grant Cardone.
Yes.
How to like just,
Great book.
you know, be accountable and scale shit, you know, and think big. What were the other 2, man? 4 Hour Workweek, Tim Ferriss. And the 5th book was this book called Traction by this guy named Gino Wickman. So each one of those books like taught me something important, which I actually implemented. Like I'd read the book and I'd actually implement whatever the thing that book told me to do. And since then, I've been like on a tear, like reading these types of books, like, you know, I just read the Russell Simmons book, Do You, which was really cool. He's kind of a little bit controversial now, but the book was written. Donald Trump wrote the foreword to that book.
He,
Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But it was a different time. I'm reading a book right now called I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, who's the brother of someone that I'm friends with. It just came out. He's like a Stanford grad, and I know the family pretty well. I've had dinner with them a couple of times. They're a really amazing, amazing family. So I'm reading that just to kind of like read about something a little bit different. I have like a whole stack of books at my house. The book that you told me to get, Ayush, I just bought, Save the Cat, which is like teaches you how to write like a screenplay and how to tell a story. So someone tells me a book, I'll just buy it. So I have like all these books that I bought that I haven't read yet. But I always have a book on my nightstand, and I always, even if it's like reading 5 pages a night before I go to bed, like I'm always reading something, and it's those types of books that right now that have my eye.
That's awesome. What advice would you give any entrepreneur that's listening right now, and just generally, like general advice, that they're kind of in a stage where they don't know maybe what they want to do, or if they want to take that leap? Because I know a lot of people sometimes will make a career change, or maybe leave their employment to start a business. What advice would you give a person that's in that situation? Because I'm sure someone out there listening right now is dealing with that, and I'm sure you attract a lot of entrepreneurs on your podcast. So, what would you say?
2 things. One is it's important to hedge the risk that you take. So for me, when I was, and I think this is very much the same for you when you were building your business, is you had a stream of income coming in from somewhere, right? So you can't like say, especially if you have responsibilities in life, like a family and kids and a mortgage and all that sort of stuff. You can't say, okay, I'm just going to stop doing this and I'm going to go balls to the wall with my dream of whatever your entrepreneurial dream is.
Right.
I'm sure it's possible to do that, but it takes a very, very long time to actuate any dream that you have as an entrepreneur. And more so, the biggest reason why a business fails is because you don't have enough money. So the reason why like 50% of restaurants go out of business in a year is because they don't have enough funding behind them. And one of my patients actually told me this, she's a restaurant entrepreneur. And I said, wow, it's such a crazy business. Like, how do you do that? And she's the one who told me that. She's like, the reason why restaurants go under is because they don't have enough to sustain the 1.5 year lean period where you're waiting for your clientele. I mean, that was the same thing for me when I started my office. I knew I was going to have no patience, man. Like, I have no patience.
You have to have a little cushion there.
But I have to have income coming in, In other words, to sustain my entrepreneurial dream, but also to like provide for my life, because I have expenses, I got 3 mouths I got to feed, So that's one. And I actually had a very good second one, but I just lost my train of thought.
Happens to me all the time.
Yeah. But the second one, really, the gist of it is you have to be all in, whatever, and now what I mean by that is, you can hedge your bets. Like, you should have an income stream coming in or whatever the way you're going to do that is. But then you also have to pursue your dream, like with insane intensity,
Effort is free, as I always say.
Right. I love that line, and that's a line that I use a lot. I stole it from you. It's a great line.
Appreciate
but yeah, I mean, like, listen, this is like, I'm hedging my bets right now, right? Like, I'm a dermatologist and I'm making an income. I have successful practices, but I'm using that income to fund this, to buy the cameras and, have a full-time videographer and, deploying the funds needed to actuate this dream of mine by making money doing something else. Right. So that's, but I'm balls to the wall with both things. Like, I'm seeing patients and reading my slides with 100% intensity. And then when I'm not doing that, the remaining hours of the week, which is a lot, probably 50 hours a week or so that I focus on this, posting to Instagram and making YouTube videos, both of them I'm doing with 100% intensity. It's like Gary Vee always says, you got to like work hard on your side hustle, have your day job and do your side hustle at night. And that's what we do,
100%. It's the age we live in. Everybody talks entrepreneurship and hustling and grinding. And I don't think too many people understand what true hustling and grinding is. Right. Obviously, I mean, you're like the definition of that. And just to backtrack briefly before we wrap things up, I know we were talking about books. You know, you listed your top 5 books at the moment that helped you along and that you are suggesting to others. Would you ever consider writing a book?
I've been, yes. The answer is yes. I just have to sit my ass down and figure out exactly how to do it. But yeah, I have some thoughts that are there, and I think a lot of the stuff that I talk about, I think it would translate well to a book. I just have to have the time to put into it. And it's coming. It's coming.
Listen, I'm sure it'll help a ton of people, man. Just from your experiences and things you've learned along the way, and things that you've, seen and done over the years. So I mean, it's been a long road, just dating back from like the humble upbringing you talked about, all the way up through high school, through college, through med school, to starting your practice with no patience, you know what I mean? And kind of like you pretty much bet on yourself by taking out $1 million loan from the bank. You said you had no money, and listen, you hustled, you went full pedal to the metal, and it shows. I mean, you got your second practice open. You have not only have you built a business, you're building an awesome, amazing brand, which is two different things people don't realize. Is you're building a brand, and I'm excited to see what's coming in the future from you, man, because just seeing the transformation, not just the physical body transformation, like we all know that's been incredible since 2012, but even just your focus. And it's not that you were ever unfocused from what I could see, but I know, like you were saying before, I noticed once you decide you're going to do something, like that's it. You made that decision, and I've never seen you like halfway do anything or wishy-washy on anything or in any way, So it's awesome to watch. I'm looking forward to what's to come in the future. I do want to close this out a little bit differently. I'll just ask you a couple quick questions, and you can kind of just go shotgun the answers the best that you can, just so your listeners can get to know you a little bit more. Give me your 3 favorite movies.
Ooh, that's a good one, man.
Yeah.
Oh, man. 3 favorite movies. Swingers. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Might be before your time.
Probably a little bit before
my
time.
It's like a Vince Vaughn movie. It's amazing. I made my wife watch that before.
Wait, with Vince Vaughn?
Yeah.
I think I did see it.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great movie. That's one of my favorites. Love Actually, I hate to say, but I'm a sucker for romantic comedies. And that's an amazing movie. And then gotta say Goodfellas, man.
Okay. That's a classic.
Yeah.
That's a classic. All right, and if you're going to work out, and obviously we know you have the state-of-the-art gym at home, what do you got to have playing through your sound system? What are you listening to? What gets you going?
Old school hip-hop, man. That's my
shit. Mean, I knew that answer because I've trained you through
Tribe Called Quest.
So many sessions.
Basically, it's the Tribe Called Quest station on Pandora. I mean, I like new hip-hop too, but old school hip-hop really gets my blood going, man.
Yeah, man. Cool. Now, are you currently Netflixing anything?
Well, my wife and I are watching Billions.
Great show. That's on
It's Showtime.
Showtime though. Yeah.
Great show. I mean, the problem is we always fall asleep at like different times during the episode at night, so we always have to keep rewatching the same episode. But I like it. I like that.
Great show. And finally, I don't know even know if you still eat this stuff anymore, but as a kid, you probably ate breakfast cereal. Give me your top 3 breakfast cereals.
Oh man, I don't even eat cereal, man.
You don't even eat cereal anymore,
I haven't eaten cereal. I do intermittent fasting, as you know,
and
I haven't eaten any of those shitty cereals in like
years,
7 or 8
right?
years, man. But I tell you what, I did like. I like Cocoa Pebbles growing up.
I never got into Pebbles, man.
So good. I like anything chocolate. Cookie Crisp is another good one.
Cookie Crisp was okay to me.
And then a third cereal. I don't even know of a third cereal that I liked growing up, man. I just leave it at those 2.
Those 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, just random questions, but just wanted to give your audience a little bit something different, to get to know you a little bit more. But it's been an absolute pleasure to sit in the big chair today and speak to and interview the man himself. And obviously, they know where to find you because they found you listening to your podcast. But if you're not following him on the other platforms, check out the YouTube channel, check out the Instagram, check out subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, he's all over the place. He's got some great content. And if you're a listener, check this out. There are videos of this on YouTube, guys. If you haven't consumed Instagram TV as well, He's doing great things, and check out his Instagram feed. You can see some really, really cool stuff. You can see some of the world's biggest cysts being treated, and he's got some really, really cool videos going on. He's got a really, really cool Instagram feed. I actually have had people that I know personally that don't know him personally, and I realized that we knew each other from the train. Like, oh, I follow that guy. You know, he's got some cool stuff on his feed. And a friend of mine who's actually just getting ready to start medical school, she was like, oh, I follow Dr. Mudgil. You know, so that was pretty cool for me. So check out his feed, guys. And again, Doc, thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to interview you today.
Thanks so much for doing this, man.
No problem.
Because it is my podcast, I'm going to close this one out. So, Justin, this was such a great idea, man. I can't thank you enough. You're an amazing trainer, but an even better friend. And I couldn't have a better person, man, conduct this interview of me, man. You did an awesome job, and we just need to have your podcast come on now.
Soon. It's in development. Stay tuned. Maybe this year, though, it'll be out.
All right, love it. Thanks, brother. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Dr. Mudgil podcast. The audio for this podcast can be found on Apple's iTunes and SoundCloud. Let's get it.